Welcome, Ron. Thanks for coming to campus on this cold, snowy afternoon.
Definitely.
And I've been thinking about the conversations we've had in the past, and both about Japan and about the beauty of writing implements, of good writing implements, which I see you brought some.
That's right.
And I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to pick your brain about one of the great books that we read on the Eastern Classics program, the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon. There's an aspect of it that I'd like to ask you about and get a better understanding of. But before I go there, maybe I should say something about the book to fill in the audience on a book that they might not have read or know about. And so tell me if I'm getting this right. So the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon was written by a 10th century Japanese woman in the Heian court. 10th century. So we think about this, about the time of Anselm, right? So Europe was emerging from the Dark Ages. And so there's this high, sophisticated courtly culture in Japan at the time that is full of beautiful and subtle things, paintings, the fabrics, and above all, the literature. So from that age, the two books that everyone now still reads, well, not everyone, but people who can appreciate things still read. It's The Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki, which is a massive book, 1,400 pages in English translation, one of the great classics of the world. And this book, right, Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon, which is not 1,400 pages, but it's a smaller thing. It's Sei Shonagon was a court lady, a contemporary of Lady Murasaki, who wrote The Tale of Genji. They knew each other. In fact, they loathed each other because there's some ways they were opposites in sensibility. And she wrote in Japanese, like Lady Murasaki. The men of the time wrote in Chinese, in classical Chinese. And so this was the time when Japanese literature took off as Japanese literature, right? So you had women who were writing with no prior tradition and coming out with works that were utterly original, right? And so the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon reads something like a journal, or an imitation of a journal, right? And so it's full of daily things, lists of things she likes, lists of things she doesn't like, little incidents, anecdotes, sometimes poetry contests, It's fragmented, right? So one can jump in any time, and there's no narrative structure, which is one of its appeals. What else do I have to say? What am I missing?
It's also gorgeous.
It's gorgeous.
Other than that, I couldn't have said that any better.
Yeah, it's one of the most beautiful examples of Japanese style, isn't it? Yeah,
I would agree.
Yeah,
I would agree.
So it's exquisitely written. It's lucid. The translators have a hard time coming up with renditions that are elegant enough.
That's right.
Incisive enough, right?
That's right. That's right.
So the book can be very beautiful. It can be very funny.
That's right.
It
quirky,
Quirky.
Yeah.
It can hit on sadness.
It's true.
Right. So what I'd like to ask about is, and I'll just open this to paragraph 258. And I'm reading, as you are, from the Meredith McKinney translation in Penguin Classics, which is the most recent fine translation. So this is Sei Shonagon talking about receiving a gift from Her Majesty, the Empress, about whom we can talk later. But there's a very sort of intimate relation between Sei Shonagon and the Empress. Right? So she says, I was talking with some people in Her Majesty's presence, or it may have been something I said as a result of her own words. And I remarked, at times, when I'm beside myself with exasperation at everything, and temporarily inclined to feel I'd simply be better off dead, or am longing to just go away somewhere, anywhere, then if I happened to come by some lovely white paper for everyday use, and a good writing brush, or white decorated paper, or Michinoku paper, I'm immensely cheered and find myself thinking I might perhaps be able to go on living for a while longer after all. And when I unroll a section of fresh green korai matting, thick and finely woven, and with the edging design in vivid black and white, I'm overcome with a feeling that life itself is just too wonderful, and I really couldn't bear to relinquish it just yet. The simplest trifles console you, don't they? Remarked Her Majesty with a smile. It must have been a very different sort of person who gazed at the moon above sad Obasute Mountain. The others who were present also teased me with such comments as, "You've certainly come up with an incredibly easy version of a magical formula for averting trouble." Right? And then, not long after this, when I'd gone back home and was in great distress, Her Majesty sent me a wrapped gift of 20 bundles of magnificent paper. And it goes on in this vein, where you see somebody who's somewhat prone to moody ups and downs, right? She's a bit of a depressive, a melancholiac at times, but it's very striking that this good paper, good brush, this special paper, good matting, like this, can pull her up again. And this happens several times in the whole book. And more than several times, she mentions the quality of her utensils, right, her implements. So I was thinking about this side of the Pillow Book of SEI SHŌNAGON, this aspect of it where, with the emphasis on, in a way, the ceremony of writing, the importance of good writing implements and atmosphere. What do you make of that? What is that about?
It's a difficult question. You know, the first thing that comes to mind is a realization, not particularly original, that I had in graduate school when I was just really getting into the ink, as it were, of modern Japanese literature, which of course required studying the ancient literature as well. And one thing that I remember reading essentially had this to say. It said that the idea that you could write a poem and not have beautiful handwriting in the calligraphic tradition was unthinkable. And for someone born so terribly late, you know, you open up these books, and even if you've gone through the process of sort of assiduously learning this very difficult language, the ancient form of Japanese, and you read it, you tend to read it in a modern style book with regular font. And of course, like, one is thankful for that. But you can begin, actually by virtue of that media, of that particular medium, to imagine that the poem has an independent existence, an existence independent of its physical instantiation. Something about modern type just makes you think things are abstractly out there in the world. There's something about regular font, oddly, which somehow almost triggers a certain almost reflexive Platonism.
Yeah,
that,
right.
You know what I mean? That there's a sense that this poem exists, and in every book that it's printed, for every one of them that's out there, the sort of reality of that poem, independent of the text, the physical text, seems to be more and more convincing. But nothing could be farther from the truth. Another scholar was talking about how, in addition, of course, to like beautiful handwriting, the actual paper that a poem might be written on. And of course, one has to remember that the poems might be written and then sent to someone else in this particular courtly environment. So it's not as if these poems simply are born outside of a particular social context. And that social context involves people, very living people, exchanging language, like a little post office, just sending signals back and forth, but not like ones and zeros. Gorgeous, beautiful. You could almost imagine a badly written poem still being embraced with real relish simply by virtue of the fact that it was so beautifully presented.
Yeah, you have some in the Tale of Genji, right? So
That's right.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mediocre aesthetically, or at least in terms of the language, but powerful in terms of its effect, because the poem, unlike we're trained to think poems are today, do have a very profound physical presence. So to get back to the question, the fact that Sei Shonagon can feel herself cheered by receiving a big bundle of paper seems more easy to imagine. One always sort of shudders to think sort of too boldly about what someone that long ago was thinking, but I feel like it's safe to imagine that, how to put this, that it must have represented not just, oh, I can write this much, but that all of that paper all the way down meant the possibility of engaging her actual world around her through the sort of physical vehicle of the paper, that on the top of which was going to be, of course, like all the brilliant thoughts that she was then going to be able to commit to record and then distribute in a certain way in the world that she lived in. I can only imagine it must have been like a giant microphone that she could use to engage the world that she was in, which of course was small, like bounded in a nutshell in a certain way, but of course infinitely huge, because what else exists beyond the capital? So, so my sense is that, I mean, to take one pass at the question, I think it may be a question one has to come back to a few times, but the physical beauty of the paper seems to me to represent the possibility for installing her language into an actual world onto which she was going to impose a kind of order, the beautiful order of her mind that you see in the pages of this book.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. So I'm thinking about your word Platonism, which I found very helpful. So the idea of the Platonic idea of the word is of a kind of symbolic representation of a thought that one has had that is not material, right? And so then the idea, the thought, comes first in that in the Platonic and the Aristotelian version. So that comes first, and it's abstract, it's immaterial. Then that finds its way into a sound, and then that finds its way into writing, right? And so that's the Platonic version, where essentially the word is an unembodied thing that is sort of abstract as unembodied. It's kind of like outside the world of body, right? And so, and then by some mysterious alchemy, it becomes embodied, right? Right. Whereas in this description of what happens, the word might even happen the moment she sits down with the brush. One
imagines, especially given that this is such a precious commodity. You sort of shudder to think like what it must have been like to write. I mean, it's not like you have a word process like you do today where you can just sort of type away into infinite space. I mean, I imagine that a lot of the composition process was happening in a very dynamic way in the mind in relationship to the actual act of writing. Again, I can't say much about it because in some ways I was just born too late to really sort of imagine what that might have been like. But by way of analogy, I know you're interested in film. By way of analogy, there was a documentary I saw recently where before digital cameras, before digital film, actors, about what it was like to hear the camera begin to whir, that sound that begins to happen, because it's literally the sound of capital. You know what I mean? It's like, this is incredibly precious because with every whir of the camera, money is being spent. And how the actor in this documentary was talking about how it just focused the mind in a certain kind of way. One imagines something maybe similar might have been the case with this bundle of paper. The idea that you have this precious commodity and to which you're going to commit your thoughts. And with this really intimate engagement with that material, it must have really freighted everything you were saying with a certain kind of importance, certain kind of value. a certain performative quality.
Yeah, you don't make mistakes.
You certainly avoid it if you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
So tell me about the paper.
Oof. Again, my area was more modern Japanese literature, so I can't say much about it. But what I do know is that book production ended in very beautiful affairs. So that I mean, and this is not something that Western culture is entirely a stranger to. You know, these sort of illuminated editions of books, we've seen these, that have a value as a physical object, and the very beauty of which must have elevated the word in a certain kind of way. You know, you think about, you get images of gold leaf in your mind. And, you know, and you know, really elegantly, precisely rendered letters might have, in a way, opposite to the, well, maybe opposite to the Platonist direction, somehow like the actual physical richness of the text maybe gave one a sense that the language that those letters were fated to carry were as precious, as beautiful, as powerful as all the forces, material, economic, social, energetic, that went into actually assembling that object.
That's right. Yeah.
And it seems to me that, like, when you look at the Genji scrolls, I mean, it almost seems like a shame to even read them. One can simply look at the book almost in the way that, like, maybe you imagine a person in her study, just sort of admiring the beautiful tomes on the wall. Like Rilke talks about the books that, like, you haven't read in some sort of foreign language, like, in the sort of strange appeal that they have as objects beyond your understanding in a certain way. One imagines anyway, or at least I do, that the intense physical beauty of these things was maybe not equally stimulating, but comparably stimulating to the actual language within the texts. Yeah. Their actual physical beauty, elevating the mind and heart and soul of the reader, maybe as much as anything actually written there.
Yeah, yeah. So that I'm thinking, as you're describing it, I'm imagining as she sits down with brush and this precious paper, right, that the Empress gave her. It's very high stakes, high pressure event, right? Indeed. That the moment she puts the brush to the paper, it's got to be good.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, and with her reputation as a female wit and a female poet. Right. In the court circles, every man was afraid of her intelligence. That's right. Right. That's right. That's right. And she knew that she, of all people, could not slip up.
That's right.
Right. She cannot write anything bad.
That's right. She of all people.
She of all people.
That's right.
And so the presentation. So once she's written this thing, it's got to be good. Right. In fact, it's got to be perfect.
I would think.
Right. And then she's going to do this, wrap it up, fold it. Perfectly. That's right. With whatever perfect accessory there is to it, a flower or a leaf.
That's right.
And then send it in the perfect way to the right person.
I think that's right.
Right.
Yep.
All of that has got to work.
Yeah. Like, however the book finds its way to a larger audience, you can't imagine it being anything like, sending a PDF off into the cosmos and hoping for the best. It seems like a very different kind of affair. And the fact that she, given her sort of very particular social position, and being a person upon whom all of these amazing expectations rested, I can only imagine that she in writing this felt herself uniquely privileged. Maybe we need a word between privileged and cursed. I'm thinking.
Yeah, right.
Between privileged and cursed. Like, you have an amazing opportunity to write this document. At the same time, historically speaking, as this other document is being written, this Chinese text. That people know at the time is being composed, or being written rather, copied, and then now, almost in counterpoint to that, this gift is made of her, where she's going to to write a document, a woman not writing in the Chinese tradition. I mean, it must have been an awesome responsibility, but clearly, centuries by now of scholarship, of fandom, have testified unambiguously that she really did rise to the challenge to sort of put into word and to the word made physical all the sort of the strange like quiddities of court life, creating this document that seems to represent the aesthetic, the ethos, the mood of Heian culture. I mean, it's astounding.
Yeah. What accounts for her happiness in receiving this paper, the brush?
Well, I mean, don't you think it's interesting in the text that in the part of the text that you read that on the one hand you have the possibility of suicide.
Yeah.
However, it might have been somewhat over dramatized. It might have been somewhat theatrical. It might have been somewhat tongue in cheek, or it may have been quite serious. The language seems to allow for a range of imaginative possibilities there. But in any event, that a serious voice is speaking, whether it's jocular or whether it's deadly serious, literally deadly serious. And, on the one hand, you have that. And you think in our sort of hopelessly modern terms about like, what would be the kind of thing that would lift one's spirits? What would be the thing that would allow one to go on? Hamlet, like I still have to kill my father. Like, is that that's what's going to get you out of bed? In this particular case, paper, which I just can empty paper, and then in the description that you read, the passage that you read, there's all the talk about the blankness, which is an amazing thing, and that somehow that seemed to represent human possibility, a reason to continue living. I mean, all the aspiring writers in the world, you can only envy a problem like that, a challenge like that.
I'm thinking about the high stakes game of courtly life in the Heian court for a woman.
Particularly.
Right? It's one false step and you're permanently humiliated.
Yes.
Right? And so it's unlivable. Your life will be not worth living if you look stupid.
Not viable.
Yeah, or clumsy.
That's right.
So she spends the day walking a tightrope, right? Various kinds of tightrope. They're confined to 3 rooms, right? And so 3 rooms, they don't get to see men's faces.
That's right.
Right? The men operate from behind a screen.
That's right. That's
a little bit like kind of Zoom, where they have a black screen, right? So you don't. So it looks like a very, very confined life, and any word that you put out, anything that you put out there into public space, is potentially dangerous. Sure. Right? So great risks are involved in any expression.
That's right.
So she lives in that world. She seems to like it. She seems to like the challenge.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, okay, so the Empress, one of the things that struck me is that the Empress, in a way, is giving her a contest, is saying, okay, do this. But there's a kind of intimacy between SEI SHŌNAGON and the Empress. The Empress is the only person that SEI SHŌNAGON has a crush on. And she doesn't seem that interested in the men. She evaluates them objectively. But the one person whose opinion that she really cares about is the Empress. Right. So, and I think the Empress knows that. Part of the striking thing about this interchange is that SEI SHŌNAGON is touched by the Empress's recognition of her emotional needs, right? The Empress gets her.
That's right. That's right.
But I think that increases the high stakes, right? She cannot disappoint now.
That's right. Because this problem, which could seem perhaps, probably never a problem like this would seem unreal, but must have seemed particularly focused. It reminds you of Emily Dickinson in some ways. Like, there's in her brother's wife, with whom, of course, famously maintains a spirited, often erotically charged exchange of letters. in a way that isn't identical to, but helps one imagine maybe court life in a sense, a kind of aristocracy, a certain exchange, a certain like lettered culture, an epistolary culture, and when you look at those letters between Dickinson and her dear, dear, dear friend, you sort of imagine that maybe she had in her a kind of concretization of the reader, a sort of person that in relation to whom your own poetic utterances were going to acquire a kind of superhuman focus. I am writing for you in a certain way. And it's as if the universal were just made incredibly particular. Right. And if I can, trusting your mind as I do, convey my thoughts to you and by you be understood, then it means that you and I, when we read Dickinson all these years later, can recognize the universal in a certain way because it was so perfectly crafted to such a profound ear. Yeah. And I imagine, again, these are just imaginings. I don't know what actually happened, but I find it difficult not to think about the relationship between the Empress and her as being maybe similar. Like it is to please this specific person. But of course, that specific person is a kind of world historical personality. So one could do a lot worse than to please her.
Yeah, right. You know what I mean? Yeah, so I mean, I love the connection with Dickinson. I love that because in Dickinson too, you have the preoccupation with the materiality of the word, right? Those the books that have come out recently on with Emily Dickinson's envelope poems, where you find the poems that are written carefully over the envelope. That's right. And paying great respect to, say, the three triangles that are on the back of the envelope. That's where you open the one triangle and you have a different reading and see the connections. You know, so Dickinson thought also very materially about it. And right down to the minutiae of her handwriting. Okay, so she didn't have Michinoku paper, she had ordinary white paper. She had we can't have it all. That's right. You can't have it all. Yeah, but she was very fastidious about, I guess, the hand scratch handwriting. You know, such that on the Emily Dickinson website, you have to have facsimiles of her manuscripts because anyone who wants to understand Emily Dickinson has to engage with the materiality. The material, that's right. Yeah. That's absolutely right. Right. So in terms of addressing a particular person, it's not like texting someone or sending an email. You don't send this abstract word from your mind to theirs. Exactly. That's not how it works. That's right. So it avoids this kind of like Platonism by Apple. You know what I mean? It's very different. And you think like one of the poems, or one of the documents, let's call them, famously, it says, this is Emily Dickinson writing, and this woman is going to receive it. And it just says, open me carefully. And there's a clear romantic, erotic sort of notion to this. Like you were going to open this document. I mean, open me carefully. It's so sexy. That's right. For lack of a better word, right? True. Yeah. And playful and intelligent and smart. Yeah. Risque but tasteful. There's this kind of like charming, plausible denial to it all. It's fantastic. And I think Dickinson and her insistence on the physicality of the language might be a good way or a good thing to keep in mind when trying to imaginatively reconstruct a world that, at least people tell us, is as far away from us as Heian Japan is. Maybe one way to do it, I mean, one wonders, for instance, it seems to me that Dickinson's insistence on the physicality of the embodied, instantiated word, SEI SHŌNAGON's as well, that somehow this commitment to physicality, I mean, I don't want to over-associate it with the biographical fact, the social fact of each of these
writers being women, but I find it difficult to I don't find analogs really. I struggle to articulate at all well why it would be that a number of other writers come to mind. Susan Howe, for instance, where the physicality of the language somehow is important. I don't know why or how to connect that to the peculiar position of a woman in the era that any of them lived in. I don't know what to do with that. However, I cannot shake the idea that there must be some kind of connection. And it seems to me that the work, and part of the joy of any of their readers, is to sort of get back to that and try to understand what that actually might be.
Yeah, Virginia Woolf too. I mean, she was classically interested, even fascinated by the physicality of writing, and also with her writing implements. You know,
is that right?
Yeah, and probably there are many more like that.
Yes, indeed.
Right, but you know, part of what I'm thinking, you know, I'm wondering about what this says about education for us, you know, especially like in nowadays, and even for us at St. John's, you know, you have very little emphasis on the physicality of the word, right? Sure. The materiality of the word. So much so that I'm thinking not just in the physical writing of the word, but also in the speaking of the word. You know, and I think we all felt that in the Zoom age when we would have digital seminars. You see the faces on the screen, but there's something you miss by losing the embodiment of the word. You know, that this is connected, that this word is not floating out there.
That's right. That's very interesting. It's like the St. John seminar room as the court in a certain way, right? Where everyone is looking at you, stakes is high. That's an amazing thing. Like the idea, like you could be reading these things independently if you wanted to, but putting writing aside for a moment and just talking about reading and discussing, like we're doing here. Like the idea that, for instance, at St. John's, which of course has this very sort of unusually intense focus on discourse, that I think maybe resurrects a kind of embodied reading and discussing as an embodied practice, the sort of social equivalent of physically beautiful paper.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because both of them actually, it turns out, to our infinite surprise and then to our infinite shame that we didn't realize it, are actually like the sort of, they're both media. They're both media. And the idea that discourse, in some ways, is almost like a kind of paper because paper is a kind of prosthetic memory, no? I mean, it's a kind of prosthetic, it's going to remember something. And if you're in your room just reading, only you are going to remember that. But when you have a group of people, be it in a St. John seminar or be it in the Heian court, then when people are gathered, there will be a social memory of that event and people will remember it. And somehow that does charge it with a certain kind of, again, the stakes will be high.
Yeah. And it seems it's not true to say, as some say, that I'm only listening to your words. I'm only listening to your arguments. Like only your arguments, your reasons, your words, they're the only things that matter. That's just not true.
It's just not true.
Right. So how you say it.
That's right.
The tone of voice.
That's
how
right.
you're sitting in your chair.
That's right.
What the expression in your face is, where you're looking,
That's right.
how you're moving.
That's
you know,
right.
all those input, how you lean on the table.
All of it.
All of it.
All of
yeah.
it. I mean, and I mean, brilliantly, the your mentioning Zoom is crucial. I mean, like because we all felt this incredible loss. I mean, in a certain way, you feel like this technology is amazing, right? I can connect with all of these people, and it's not that you can't. No one's going to deny that Zoom hasn't been a boon to all of us, but it's good enough. It's just good enough, and just lacking enough to actually remind you of all that you had before. But weirdly enough, it's almost as if you couldn't have realized how amazing it is to sit here with someone and actually speak and have a conversation until you and I are then suddenly sort of prophylactically insulated from one another with a screen. It's amazing that it changes things as much as it does. But you shouldn't be surprised in a certain way because, had I been Dickinson and sent a poem to someone and it was just on some industry standard envelope, as if the only thing that mattered were the typed words on the page or the written words on the page, if that were all that were at stake, we wouldn't be as amazingly impressed as we are by this example that we have in the American context with Dickinson, in the Japanese context with SEI SHŌNAGON, of the literature having a kind of richness that it's impossible really to reconstruct in your mind unless you remember the kind of physical document in which it's been installed, and then the social world around it that like some kind of super collider just compresses the language to a perfect point. It's hard to say it any more clearly, but this tradition of women writers, maybe particularly, reminds us of this. Again, though, the reasons why people like SEI SHŌNAGON, or not the reasons, but the ultimate significance of the fact that people like SEI SHŌNAGON or Emily Dickinson took care to create these beautiful works, which were always mindful of the sort of physical surroundings and mindful of the social surroundings. And somehow that it was in keeping pristinely cognizant of those things that they were both able to summarize not only with perfect precision the moment that they were in, but somehow to do so in a way that the entire world was illuminated, despite the fact that they were essentially broadcasting from within Hamlet's nutshell.
No, that's what, there's three rooms in Amherst, three rooms in Heian Court.
That's right.
Right, yeah, so, that's really wonderful. So then, in a way, the act of writing physically, you're saying it's both a kind of material engagement with the world, kind of a bodily engagement with my world right now, but also my social world, right? So it's an actualized moment, you know, as Dogen might say, where everything is there, everything in my world is in the moment I put my pen to paper, my brush to paper, that everything's at stake in this. And there's a joy in that, you know, so if you have to be fully present.
It's true.
Right.
It's
and
true.
You can't be Emily Dickinson if you don't enjoy that.
No, that's right. That's or require it in some profound way. I mean, it's funny. I mean, language, of course, will never be, to my mind, this is a sort of barbaric word, but physicalizable. Like language, it might sound like a contradiction with what I'm saying earlier, but I think that impression will fade. Language is still language, and language is an abstract vehicle. It always will be. But it seems to me that writing with a sense of one's social milieu in mind, in a way that any good Marxist critic would understand the necessity for instance, that writing with the world in mind, the social dynamics that constrain one's speech, and the rules of which, by hacking in a certain kind of way, you're able to articulate something almost in spite of the limitations of the era. By maintaining that kind of worldly mindfulness, you know, the America that Dickinson lived in, or the Japan that SEI SHŌNAGON lived in, or rather, I shouldn't even say Japan, the Heian court setting particularly that she lived in, by being constrained to articulate that reality in a very concrete way, I think, ironically enough, counterintuitively enough, paradoxically enough, I think that's partly why the works achieve a kind of incredible abstract universality that, oddly enough, it's the writers who focus on the social milieu, and analogously, the writers that focus in some ways, or at least require that their otherwise, again, pristinely abstract language nonetheless be committed to existing in a physical world. And that and maybe this is more interesting, that they actually reject the physical world in a certain way. Because if you were just interested in the physical world, like the envelope would be enough, right? Mm-hmm. The page as it is would be enough. But that's not what they actually do. I mean, actually, when people begin to alter the physical world, like there's this amazing moment. It's got to be the most amazing moment in Hegel, where he talks about, I think, a boy at the side of a lake. You know, there's the water, and then he throws a stone into it, and then watches the concentric circles move out. I mean, if the physical world were enough, you would just be staring infinitely into it. But that's not what it is. It's somehow the alteration of the physical world, where you see your own mind reflected in the kind of literal, in that case, turbulence created, this rippling effect, and it goes outward, infinitely, this infinitely sort of expanding concentric circles. I mean, Hegel chose a very nice image to carry this idea to us in. But in a similar way, these, of course, like incredibly philosophical writers like say Shonagon or Dickinson, you know, like one imagines that. So when I say that they're committed to the physical world, it's not that they just are committed to the physical world, which is almost meaningless. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's actually committed to the physical world, be it say Shonagon or be it LeBron James, is interested in doing something that left alone simply wouldn't be possible. So it's the alteration of it, learning how to make, for example, that the triangles in the envelope, to make those things language-like. So in some sense, you could also look at it as a kind of, one wants to avoid the word colonization, but a sort of what's the right word for this? If you think of it, let me know. But it's a kind of expansion.
Yeah, like a spilling out.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
A kind of expansion of the mind into the physical world, because again, the physical world by itself is mute.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that feeling of the ink going into the paper, right? And
Right.
say Shonagon probably would have ground her own ink, right? And whatever the ink comes from minerals, tree bark, whatever she's using, you know. So that's in powdered form that she would add water to, that she would mix and stir.
That whole process.
And so she's made it, you know. So then elements of that very elemental thing of pigment, right, is here, and she makes it speak.
Yeah, that's right.
As it were, you know. So then as soon as you have this chemical reaction of ink on paper, which were like rice or some other kind of fiber, sometimes a little bit of silk mixed in. So in a way, like the whole elemental world can be there in the interaction. But the moment the brush meets it, and that ink kind of starts seeping into the paper.
That's right.
That is in a way your soul.
I think that's
like
I think
seeping
that's absolutely
into
right.
the world. Yeah.
I mean, it's like you almost imagine a continuum, language qua language, and then these substances, the manipulation of which through a highly motivated, technically and technologically oriented mind, altering these substances so that they become vehicles of speech. In some ways, it is turning the physical word into a letter. It is turning the physical word into, you know, L. And suddenly, when you see ink, I almost imagine it being like a kind of proto word, you know, a kind of like on the verge of utterance. And she carries that what otherwise would have been a perfectly mute, mindless nature. Although, of course, like when you recall animistic traditions, there may be limits to that particular characterization. But nonetheless, that physical substance, the ink, or in a painterly tradition like aquamarine, that all these things like were the beginning of someone saying something already. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you imagine in some sense the preparation to articulate something poetically in the preparation of the substances. And again, I feel like this is so historically removed from where we are at. that it's hard to get a sense of the significance of that.
Yeah, it's kind of a ritual preparation.
That's right.
Whereby that it allows things in your subconscious to queue up.
That's right.
Right, and so
I think that's right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
preparing for the moment, allowing it to open.
That's right. And to think that all of this writing might not have been as successful as it was ultimately, but for that. Now, of course, as readers, we don't particularly have access to that. We can only imagine it on the basis of the physical and poetic evidence. Sort of forensically, we can kind of reconstruct what it must have been like. But I think anyone at the time would have understood this, that the actual physical implements are already talking. They're already kind of lyrically alive. Mm-hmm. And I mean, because if that weren't the case, how could a bad poem still be beautiful?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And otherwise, I mean, doggerel might be too strong a word, but a poem that's otherwise fairly lackluster might have been sort of quaint or almost adorable for the fact, cute, for the fact that it's not such a great thing, but Lord, look at the sort of beauty of the document. If language were enough, or if language were the only important thing, that wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, so by language you mean logos, in a way that language, you're suggesting language isn't just logos.
Interesting, that's right, in a surprising way, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is difficult to put into words. But yes, it's like there is something, you could almost say like both of these writers' commitment to the physical world when they were writing was logical. You know what I mean? It makes sense that they would have charge these materials with that kind of energy, because in some sense, the material world was already as if speaking to you, already was as if freighted with the power to become letter-like.
Yeah.
And I think they just took what was already a letter and then spun it out calligraphically into full words, and into the kind of poetry that we have today. And when you get that, of course, in like a modern book form, you lose that. And so, but of course, if you are here with you and talking about it, or if you're in a St. John seminar and you're reading over this, or you're reading Euclid or whatever you're reading, and then you recall for a second like what this would have been like, or if you think about Socrates and philosophy, like you imagine like philosophy as a kind of, street-based.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like something that actually happens in this social space. That the reconstruction of that, I think, in some sense, is almost part of like a liberal arts education.
Yeah, the Socratic dialogue,
That's right.
which does not take place in a social vacuum.
Right.
You have to know what the stakes are
That's
for
right.
these people. You have to know who they are. You have to know why Socrates might be talking to them like this. You have to know
That's
why
right.
they might not be saying certain things.
That's right.
Right. So
That's
it's an aliveness to the whole situation.
Yeah. It's
right.
You have to sort of almost reanimate. You have to sort of reanimate those things. I mean, because to read a book in any other way would almost be like to say you're going to sit down and watch a movie and no one turns on the projector.
Right.
I mean, it's that bizarre.
Yeah.
So
or to read a musical score and never hear it performed.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's a better analogy.
That's right. But do you think that something fundamental is missing then in, say, modern liberal arts education when people do not have this engagement with writing implements, with writing materials?
That's interesting.
Right. So
I have it on good authority. I mean, if you were anything like me, it's galling, like how amazing your average French essayist is. You know what I mean? And you hear about the sort of educational training to which they were subjected rather. Now, I'm not, just to be perfectly clear, I'm not saying that like St. John's needs to like start having like timed essays. I'm really not. What the modern contemporary solution to this kind of lacuna would be, I can only confess ignorance. I don't know what would be the answer to this, but I think one could do worse than, for instance, to write an essay, to collect her thoughts using the ultimate word processor. You know what I mean? And there's something about, And also, like, I mean, this is sort of an aside, but you know, like when I pick up this pencil here, you know, this is a black wing, and I know there's a kind of cult of the black wing among some St. John's students. I'm seeing them more and more appear in my seminars and classes.
A cult stuff.
It's a bit of a,
yeah.
yeah. And you know, someone said that that Nabokov wrote with him. And so, you know, you pick it up and you think to yourself, like, this is amazing. Like, you know, I'm writing with Nabokov. You know, but there is a certain kind of thing that happens when you pick up implements that feel charged and that invest the intellectual, the writing project with a certain kind of majesty. You know, like that actor hearing the cameras were like, okay, now we're about to do something serious here. And somehow like the physical object itself seems to bring that out of you. Now, in a similar way, you know, if you have an hour and it's timed to write an essay and you have to collect your thoughts in a way where not too much editing is possible, because with a pencil and paper, it's like you can't do that in quite the same way. Mm-hmm. You get the sense that the stakes involved in an essayistic utterance, like the stakes involved in a painterly utterance, like the stakes involved in speaking in front of all of your peers, that all of that gains a kind of focus and a kind of clarity by virtue of having certain constraints, mm-hmm. Temporal, physical, and so there is something, it seems to me, missing in really, it's not even just education, like sort of modern life in general. We are getting farther and farther away from a certain kind of analog richness. Now, part of that's fine, you know what I mean? But you do know somehow that our commitment to the infinite scroll of a Microsoft Word document or any electronic word processor, the fact that it just allows you to continue on and that there's no limitation at all upon what you actually are about to write, whatever the advantages of that might be, the digital world is not giving you a sense of constraint. It's not giving you a sense of limits. And of course, like any limit should remind you of your own mortality in a certain way. And somehow when you're writing on a word processor, you just think you have all the time in the world or you have all the space in the world. Whereas you imagine like, you know, when Foucault is becoming like the great essayist that he was, that, you know, he's taking these exams, whatever he's doing, that kind of compression is inextricable from the sort of amazing elegance that you often see produced in that generation of writers. And I think we've lost a bit of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. That might be a perfect place to end. Thank you very much for
nothing. This has been a real pleasure.
Okashi conversation. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Absolutely. For nothing. Thank you so much.